San Jose. Okay, well, welcome. Thank you in advance. We appreciate it. We've been doing these virtual programs for, I think, about 15 months now, and it's working out quite well. So we appreciate your time. And with that, I'll mute, and everybody else, please mute if you're not. And go ahead, Bob. Thank you.
Hey, you should be seeing my slides full screen.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. So here's an overview of the presentation today. A little bit about legacy serial ports from the good old days, USB ports and some of their devices, how USB to serial adapters work, and how to optimize them using the Windows Device Manager to take care of numbering your serial ports and managing them, getting rid of ones you don't need anymore. And as was asked earlier, how to use a serial port for CWFSK and PTT keying, and some methods of sharing serial ports when more than one program needs to talk to the radio. And finally, wrapping it up with some mention of USB sound cards. There'll be a Q&A at the end, and but if you have something you want to interrupt me with, that's okay too. So let's see if this works. I'm trying to use my laser pointer here. You guys seeing the laser pointer?
Yes, it's there.
Okay, so that port there is a DE9. It's not called a DB9. The B is the shell size. This is a B-sized shell. And this is an E-sized shell. There's also A-sized shells with 15 pins in 2 rows. So the correct terminology, and you'll hear me use it, is DE9, not DB9. And of course, it's hard to find a PC with these on it, although it is still possible. Some motherboards have a connector for it, and you just add this kind of ribbon cable to the back shell on a desktop, and you can get the real serial ports, and they're stable and they're good if you can get them. So in the old days, life was simple. There was a simple 9-pin serial connector on the radio. Unfortunately, Elecraft and ICOM went with female connectors, and Yaesu and Kenwood went with male connectors and turned them upside down. So nobody could agree on what's right. I actually think Elecraft and ICOM did it correctly, but ICOM gave up serial ports like this after they produced the 7800. Now they've gone strictly USB and CIV. So then they thought we'd improve computers by making them smaller. And so they got rid of the big connectors, and they ended up with these USB ports everywhere. But the problem is there's a lot of peripherals that are still using 9-pin serial ports. For example, remote rig boxes, rotator controllers, some of them, step-IR antennas, control boxes, and some array solutions, band decoders, and so on. They like to monitor the 9-pin serial port, not to mention ACOM and SPE and Elecraft amplifiers can also auto-track by sniffing the serial port data, but not the USB port data. So one solution when you ran out of serial ports was to use a USB to serial adapter. Just briefly, here's what the USB ports generally look like. There's other styles too. There's mini and micro, but on your PC, you're generally going to find a whole bunch of type A's like this, the flat kind. And then on the radio end or the device end, like a disk drive, board disk drive, you'd find the square one. That's called the type B. The blue ones are the super speed ones, the USB 3.0. Generally, the only radio I know about that has a USB 3.0 port on it is the IC7610. But generally, it's not used for rig control. It's used for data transfer of waterfall data or maybe the IQ data for the SDR. So you can ignore the blue connector. So there's a lot of variation in USB to serial adapters. Some are great in kind of order of preference from best to worst. Edge port, I'll show you a picture of that later. They're really stable. They're so compatible that MMTTY software can open those serial ports directly with no extra software needed. The Ultimate drives included with microham interfaces work about the same, but you have to use the proprietary microham router to manage them. My favorite for general purpose is the FTDI. I think that stands for Future Technology something. I think it's a UK company. They're very good and stable. They do require an extra add-on program called EXTFSK if you want MMTTY to key through them for RIDI FSK. And they all used in all the current Elecraft devices, the K3, the K4, And also the amplifiers, the KPA 1500 has a FTDI USB to serial port built in. ICOM, Kenwood, and Yaesu chose the Silicon Labs drivers. They seem to work quite well too. But you have to get the driver from their website. Sometimes the driver from Silicon Labs will break things. But the one you want to avoid at all costs is anything made by Prolific. Prolific drivers are unstable. They don't behave well with others. And I recommend electronics recycling as the best destination for any Prolific USB to serial adapter. So here's some pictures of the EdgePort 4. It's very expensive to buy new. My friend Ed Munns, W0YK, had a collection of these he acquired from various sources. He's sold out of those now, but he has some of the 8-port models left. They require no power. You just get power from the USB cable, and this one gives you 8 serial ports. And they're very Windows 10, at least. Actually, many versions of Windows automatically finds and installs them. Macs do not, but there is a Mac driver available. And for Linux too, I believe. StarTech kind of took the same concept. They went with FTDI and put a 4-port package together. It does need a separate 5-volt power supply, which they provide. And they also have an 8-port model, which you're seeing here. And same thing, separate 5-volt power supply. Micro-ham devices, this is the legendary MicroKeyer 2R, the MK USB to serial adapter is by Mouser or by DigiKey or by Amazon. These Gizmos, this is a 1-port over here. That's available on DigiKey and Mouser for about 17 bucks. The Gizmo 2-port is an FTDI, and it's 2 ports here on a cable too. And then the 4-port Gizmo is over here for only 40 bucks. So it's a pretty good deal. I don't really like this plastic shell where they put all the electronics, but so far I haven't heard too many complaints about RFI with them. The ones that I mentioned to avoid are the Prolific models. I'll show you in a bit how to tell what you've got. You can't usually tell by looking, although they often look like this. There's also some good FTDI ones that look like this, so you can't quite tell. If they don't mention FTDI in the ad or the literature or the brochure, it's probably Prolific because they're the cheapest. So the cheapest adapter you can buy is usually the wrong decision in this case. So please don't use them ever. If you see them, uninstall them from the device manager and unplug them and put them in the recycling. What you normally do is you just connect the FTDI Elecraft or EdgePort device straight to the PC, and Windows automatically will recognize the driver and assign it a COM port number based on what numbers it's already seen. It adds up from there. You then use the Windows Device Manager to see what COM port number it got, or sometimes the pop-up message when it's installing will tell you. And the COM port number, though, on these USB to serial adapters will change if you move the USB cable from one port on your PC to another, if that port happens to be a separate internal hub. These PCs have, 2 or 3 hubs, maybe one dedicated to USB 2.0, a separate one dedicated to USB 3.0. So if you move the cable from one to the other, you're going to find a new COM port number. And that can be, so I tend to recommend always plugging the device into the same number, mark them with color codes or something. So you always plug the USB cable for each device into its same port, and then the numbers won't change around on you. It's a little hard to figure out what hub is what otherwise. Now, if you have a radio you want to connect, it's important that you install the manufacturer's device driver first and then plug in the USB cable. Even if the radio is powered off, while the power comes through the USB cable, the components are active on the other side of that. So even with the radio powered off, the device will be active. And ICOM has a big red switch on the back that seems to disconnect it. But if you turn it off with the front power button, you'll still see your USB ports and so on. So don't plug in the USB cable, even with the radio off, until you first install the driver. An exception would be Elecraft, because the FTDIs don't need any driver special install first. But everybody's anxious to make their radio work, and they get a new computer and they plug it right in and say, oops, I forgot to do something. It'll usually come up in the device manager as something called unknown device. And then you won't ever, even if you install the drivers after that, it won't come up right. So you have to right click and uninstall the unknown device, and then install a driver, and then plug in the device, and then it'll be recognized okay. And it'll assign a COM port number, 1 or 2 usually. But if you don't like the COM port numbers, you can change them with the device manager. So how do you use the Windows Device Manager? There's a couple ways to start it. You can right-click on the Start button in Windows 10, and you'll see Device Manager and the list of stuff. My favorite way to do it is to hold down the Windows key on your keyboard and tap the letter R for Run, and that brings up a little box where you can type in the name of the Device Manager program, which is devmanagement.msc. And the nice thing about the Run box in Windows is it remembers everything you've ever typed in there, and you can pick from the list after that point. You don't have to do any more typing. But in order to really see everything that's there in the Device Manager, if you're using a version of Windows before Windows 10, you need to set the system environment variable, show non-present devices. Otherwise, the Device Manager will not show you all the old stale ports that are on your system. But this only applies if you're using a version of Windows prior to Windows 10. I'm going to run through these next slides quickly because I think most of you are probably on Windows 10 by now. This is here for your reference on how to set a system environment variable if you don't know how to do that. This shows you what to do. Go to the Advanced tab, click Environment Variables, click New, and then pipe in the name and set it to 1 and click OK. That's only on prior to Windows 10. So even after you do that on both Windows 7, 10, all of them, and every time you start the Device Manager, you always have to go View, Show Hidden Devices. If you don't do that, it doesn't remember it. That checkbox is not sticky. So you always want to do that, and the reason for that is, you see this icon down here is gray. That means that device is assigned to COM5, but it's not plugged in right now. So these ones that are dark, they're plugged in right now. And the only way you can see these grayed out ones is to select View, Show Hidden Devices. So once you find a serial port, if it's prolific, it might even say in the name prolific, but you can check for sure. You right-click on the device and click this Properties down here, and then go to the Driver tab. Excuse me, the Driver tab right here, and it tells you who the driver is of that, the provider is for that device. In this case, it's s.t.e.m, which is cool. But if it was said prolific, you want to then click this Uninstall Device button. You don't want any prolifics on your system. And you also want to, and this is important, check this little box, because the next thing that comes up when you say delete device, do you delete the driver software for this device? And then the prolific driver software is gone from the system and won't interfere with the well-behaving device drivers made by other manufacturers for COM ports. However, if it's s.t.e.m, you're still not done yet. You have to go to the Port Settings tab and click this Advanced button. And this is to prevent, when later I'm going to show you how you can key the rig from the serial port pins. But by default, the settings that s.t.e.m chose are not good, because they'll key a radio every time you turn on the PC or plug in the USB cable. Your radio keyed like about 6 times. You probably heard that once in a while. Why is that? Well, it's because these default options right here, serial enumerator and disable modem and the modem control, it's looking for a serial mouse. Now, when's the last time you saw a mouse with a serial connector on the other end? Maybe 30 years ago. So you need to uncheck that box and make it look like this. So serial enumerator is not, serial enumerator is not checked, and disable modem control at startup is checked. And you want to do that every time you connect a new s.t.e.m device. You have to go to that port and change it. And sometimes, like in the last couple of weeks, Windows Update installed a new s.t.e.m device driver, and what does it do? It sets all these settings right back to the defaults. So when that happens, if you see your radio keying, check these boxes as shown, and it won't key your radio anymore, assuming you've set the menu in your radios to enable that. I even found out recently, and this is kind of a new update, that the same thing is happening on legacy serial ports like COM1 and COM2 with the 9-pin connector on the back. You can fix it. You simply need to go into the registry, find this key here, and I'll show you how to do that. And then you won't have any unwanted keying. It's also looking for a serial mouse on these connectors. So if you want to mess with the registry, you want to be safe, you can always create a restore point down here. That'll sort of let you give you a place to get back to if you really mess up. But if you're careful, you can use the registry editor. You're not going to break anything. Or if you do, you can get it back. So you can always do create a restore point. And then you go into the device manager and you go into that details tab on your COM port of interest. In this case, it's my COM1 port. And I look for this device instance path value. And one little tip, whenever you see a little drop-down arrow and a drop-down box in Windows and any control, if you click this little down arrow, you get a whole long list of stuff and you might have trouble locating what you want. They're usually in alphabetical order, but you have to scroll around. Just type the letter D if you want things that start with the letter D, and it jumps right to that entry in the list box. Type D again, it goes to the next entry in the list box. So that's a trick for navigating drop-down lists in Windows a lot faster than scrolling and clicking. Just type the letter D. Anyway, you make note of this device instance path down here. That's what you're going to look for in the registry. And in the registry, under this main key, local machine, current control set enum, you'll find that path, PNP05010. And down here, there's something that says upper filters. And what does it say? Serial enumerator. Oh, that's the thing that looks for a mouse. So the way you fix that is you just rename that key to old upper filters. I didn't want to blank it out. I didn't know what it would do. I just renamed it to old upper filters, and then problem solved. No more keying on this legacy serial ports. The other thing you want to do if you're going to connect a rig by a serial port is you don't want it being powered down in the middle of a contest or something. So you don't want the power savings options to do anything. So locate all of your hub devices, like these generic USB hub things. Right-click on them and select Properties, and go to the Power Management tab. If there's no Power Management tab, go to the next one. And this will always be checked by default. Allow the computer to turn off this device to save power. Well, that's the last thing you want to do when you're connected to a radio. So be sure to uncheck that box and do it on every hub, and you'll have a lot more stable system, especially if you go away from the computer for long periods of time and leave everything on. Besides Device Manager, there's another tool out there that I use sometimes called USB Device View or USB D View. Their website is bizarre. You have to scroll way down the page to finally locate this feedback section, and that's where they have the link for download USB D View. Don't know why they did it that way. Maybe they want you to read a bunch of ads or something before you get to it, but that's how you download it. And this is a screenshot of what it looks like. It's kind of hard to read, but one of the helpful things you can do is you can sort by the last plug, unplug date. So if you just plug something in and you're not sure what it is, you can sort by date and figure out maybe what COM port number it got assigned to and some other useful information about it. Well, the problem with these COM port numbers is Windows it doesn't randomly assign them, it just kind of increases them every time you plug a new device in or move it to a different hub. So the numbers get kind of bizarre. There's some software like WinTest that won't handle anything higher than COM13. So one suggestion is to just renumber your serial ports kind of left to right to match the gear in your station. Maybe starting with transceivers, make it COM3, and then the next transceiver COM4, and then go to amplifiers 5 and 6. And the way to do this, to make it simple, is first use the Windows Device Manager like I showed, show all hidden devices. Anything that's grayed out you're not using anymore, uninstall that serial port. Don't uninstall the driver, just uninstall the serial port. And then you can use the remaining COM ports and renumber them to those gaps you just made in the numbering sequence by getting rid of all the stale ones. So how do you do that? You go to the right-click on the COM port, Properties, Port Settings tab, and then you click the Advanced button. And then you can renumber the serial ports. So here's an example from FTDI. Other drivers don't have all these options, but there'll be a COM port number in the advanced settings, and you can change it to anything you want. And you may see this in use icon here too for some of them. And if you try to renumber to them, you'll get a warning. Well, what does this in use mean? Well, it just means that COM port number was assigned to some device, and it could have been years ago. It may not even be plugged in anymore. It usually does not mean that you can't use it when you're reassigning it, especially if that port is grayed out or hidden in the device manager list of ports. Again, as I mentioned, if you uninstall all the old stale devices first, you'll get a lot less in-use flags. But if you still renumber it and you get this message that says it's being used by another device and complains, you can generally click yes and you won't have any issues. So here's a trick that I only recently learned about. I wanted to name all the serial ports in my device manager, so I wouldn't have to refer to pieces of paper to figure out what device is on what COM port. So how did I get these little extra labels in here? That's not something you can do with the device manager directly, unfortunately. So the way you do it is, again, you right click and you go to that device properties details and you find the device instance path again. In this case, it's FTDI bus and a big long string. Again, as I mentioned, you can just tap the letter D on your keyboard to jump to the device instance path section of the property list. And make a note of that, and then go back into the registry editor, same key as before, enum, and you'll find, there it is, FTDI bus, and it's got a sub key with that big long string in it. And then below that, there's this 000 thing, and you highlight that sub key, and right over here, it has the friendly name, and it did say USB port COM3. So you just edit that name and add whatever designation you want, like K4 serial number 16, and it comes up with this edit. You can either double click on it or right click and modify. You can edit the value of the friendly name very easily, click OK, refresh your device manager, and the new name will show up in the list. That's a very handy trick for renaming your serial ports. However, there is one catch. If you do plug it into a different place, or Windows installs a new device driver, and all your serial ports will get set back to their default names, so you may have to do this more than once. So it fortunately doesn't keep the name along with the device ID. The device ID is made from the hub and the port and other things. So you may have to renumber all the ports first and then worry about naming them. That'd be my recommendation, because if you renumber it, the name goes away. So sometimes you end up with a situation where my program won't open the serial port to the radio. It says serial port in use. WSJT has it, or you don't know. You want to figure out who's using the serial port right now. Maybe it's minimized. Maybe it's another window. Maybe it's off screen. There's some program that's grabbed my serial port and I can't open it. So there is a program that will tell you exactly who owns the serial port, and it's called Process Explorer. It's a free program. I hear some audio. Am I okay? Are you guys still there?
I mean, yeah.
Okay, he muted. Okay, so there is a situation where you want to find out who's using a serial port. You can download Process Explorer, and you want to run the 64-bit version as administrator to really make everything work. And then I'll show you a picture of this binoculars icon where you can search for strings. Unfortunately, all the device manufacturers chose different names for their COM port handles, and so you have to learn this list, or you can search a different way. I'll show you. So if you think it's an edge port device, you would search for device edge, just a partial string there. FTDI uses virtual COM port. Hardware serial ports say SCR, Silicon Labs, they start with SIL, and so on. So how do I figure out, how do I use this Process Explorer program? Well, once you install it, you'll find that this icon comes up that looks like a little binoculars. You click on that and you get a search box that comes up, and that's where you type in those device strings. And as soon as you click search, it tells you which program is currently opened that device. In this case, WinTest has. Here's another example where I found that OmniRig had opened the device. OmniRig is a port sharing software I'll talk about later. A lot of programs like WSGX and Log4OM can use it to allow multi-access to a serial port. But if you like running one of these with OmniRig and then some other program doesn't use OmniRig like N1MM or HRD, then it won't be able to open the port. So Process Explorer is very handy for figuring out what programs grab the port. And if you're not sure exactly what string to search for, but you know which COM port your program normally opens and it's working okay, you can use this funny icon here that they label the Find Windows Process icon. And so you can actually grab that icon with the mouse and drag it on top of a window where your program is running that uses a COM port. And that causes Process Explorer to jump right to that process that's running, right to that owns that window. And then, so it's already highlighted. In this case, I drag it over wintest.exe. And then I go View, Lower Pane, View, Handles. You only have to do that once. It remembers. And then you can sort by the handle names just by clicking on the title bar in the list. That sorts the list. There's a title you can't see here. You click on that, it sorts them alphabetically, and start searching all the devices for something that looks like a serial port. Whoop, there it is, VCP0. So that's the string I want to search for to see who's using the VCPs. So that's how you figure out what name to use if you tried all the names you can think of and it's not working. All right, let's switch gears here a little bit and talk a little bit about how you can use the pins on a serial port or a virtual serial port to key your radio for CW or FSK or a PTT. So this circuit has been around for decades, and it's very simple. If you guys don't remember your schematics, it was very simple. When this pin here on a serial port will swing to a plus voltage or a minus voltage. Same with the RTS pin. When it goes to a plus voltage, like plus 6 volts or plus 12 volts, that turns on this transistor, and this transistor then conducts and grounds whatever is connected to that pin. When the voltage is low, this transistor is off, and that's an open circuit. This is called an open collector keying circuit. That's the collector, that's the emitter. So this circuit is very reliable, very stable, and not too susceptible to RFI as it is. People say you should use optical isolators. I've had nothing but RFI troubles with optical isolators, and HF might work better at VHF, but at HF, I think this is the way to go. So we used to build those, W1WEF used to build those into the shell of a DE9 connector or DB25 connector for parallel port keying. It worked the same. So Alcraft noted that everyone was doing that. So why don't we're not using those pins inside the radio, why don't we just put the keying circuit inside the radio? So you don't have to do anything but plug in a cable. No custom connector required. And as I mentioned, they're not using those pins for the normal RS-232 handshaking that some radios like Kenwood uses the RTS pin for that. So then they're free for other purposes. And in the K3, you would set this menu to RTS DTR. That means the RTS pin will do PTT and the DTR pin will do CW keying. The default is off, off. Of course, as I mentioned, if you set this, then your serial port can key your radio, and if it's keying it 6 or 7 times, that means you forgot to change the FTDI settings. Now this works the same and just as well timing-wise over a real legacy serial port as over a USB. There seems to be a myth around that the performances of your CW will be real jittery if you use a serial port instead of a WinKey. I hope I can dispel that myth tonight. But as I mentioned, if you want to prevent the PC from keying your radio when it reboots or you connect the cable, please do remember to change those 2 default FTDI port settings on every FTDI port that's got a radio connected to it. Lcraft K4, which I'm privileged to have here as a field tester for Lcraft, is same system as the K3, but now you get 3 serial ports where you can pick and choose, so there's no conflict between MMTTY and the rig control software like N1MM. There's a beautiful menu where you can tell it that you want, in this case, I wanted the RTS pin of the first virtual serial port to be used for PTT, and I wanted the DTR to be used for CW. And down here is the second serial port, and there's one above it in the menu for the 9-pin legacy serial connector that is conveniently located on the back of the K4. Again, very important to check those 2 options because they're, again, using FTDI. ICOM came out a little bit later. I copied what Lcraft did, but they got smarter and they added FSK as an option for keying via those pins. If you want to key FSK on a K3, you have to use the accessory connector, the 15-pin. You can't do it on a serial port directly that's supported by the radio, but ICOM supports it. And as I mentioned, the timing will be okay if you set the performance options in your PC correctly, and I'll have a slide about that later. All of these modern ICOM models support CW, PTT, and FSK keying over virtual serial port USB cable. The problem with the 7300 is it just generates 1 port, so it's a little hard to share MMTTY and your rig control software with it. However, the workaround there is to use the CIV port for rig control and use the USB connector for audio and keying. These radios all provide 2 virtual serial ports, so the conflict goes away and you don't need to use the CIV connector. This is how they show up in the device manager. The older radios show up kind of like this, and the newer one, they've labeled it port A and port B. So you kind of tell which is which, because one of them will work for rig control, I think the A, and the B will not. So it'll only be used for keying. So it's not totally symmetrical that you can use both ports for rig control by 2 different programs at the same time. K4 does let you do that. I like to keep it simple, even though you could assign the pin to any function. I prefer to assign the DTR pin for keying and the RTS pin for PTT. That's sort of traditional. And then use the B port for MMTTY. And the way I remember what to do on all of these is I just remember that these things are close together in the alphabet. DTR is close to the CW and F for FSK keying, and PTT is close in the alphabet to the RTS pin, and the send pin is just what some radios call the PTT input, the send key. So you do need to determine on ICOM rigs especially what port A and port B is, because they won't always be numbered sequentially depending on what gaps you had in your sequence and what order you plug things in. To confirm for sure, you right-click on the device manager and you go to the details tab, again, our friendly device instance path. And for ICOM rigs, this last letter here, A, tells you that's the port A. In this case, it was COM5, got assigned to port A. And if probably COM6 is assigned to port B, but sometimes they might be reversed. And you try to use COM5 for controlling rig and it doesn't work because you got to use the A port for rig control in ICOM. I'll go through these slides in not much detail. I'll do one or two, and then the rest are there for your reference. But all of these radios have a menu setting similar but different, where you tell it, I want to do my keying of CW on the DTR pin or the RIDI. You got to pick one or the other. And I want to do PTT on the RTS pin. And then in your logging software, and I'll show you a screenshot, you tell it I want to key CW on the DTR and PTT on the RTS. Again, for MMTTY, it can't share the same serial port used for rig control. So as I mentioned, use the CIV connector or with a CT7 or equivalent, CT17 or equivalent for rig control, and use the USB cable for MMTTY keying. 705 has the two serial ports. They call them A and B, and this is what I recommend for the settings there. You will have to use EXTFSK for MMTTY for these Silicon Labs serial ports. You can't open them directly at 45.5 baud as you could with an edge port or a legacy serial port. But there is one limitation in that you get to pick one and only one PTT pin. So like you might want to use one PTT pin with WSJTX on the A port, and then another one for MMTTY on the B port. Well, you got to keep going in the menu to change the PTT pin from one port to the other. Don't have to do that in a K4 because you can have multiple RTS pins defined. 7610, same exact story. I'll go through these a little quickly. Menus look a little different. They call it USB 1A and USB 1B because their 2 port is that blue one I showed you that's unique to the 7610. Same story. 7850, no blue ports. They call it USB 1 and USB 2 instead of A and B. They can't get consistent. Different hardware teams designed by committee, I guess. But it all works the same if you set the menu the same. Yaesu now, moving on to them. They also use the Silicon Labs ports. They call them the enhanced and the standard, and in Yaesu rigs, you use the enhanced for rig control, and the standard can be used for keying. Yeah, same here in this Yaesu one. I do recommend, if you want to use that RTS pin, you got to set this default setting of CAT RTS to off. Otherwise, it's going to use the RTS pin for RS-232 handshaking, and you won't be able to use it for PTT. So and it's really not necessary. I haven't seen very little difference having that on, which is the default. So I recommend always turning it off. And they have a different setting for each mode for some reason. One for CW, one for sideband and RIDI. The one that's kind of backwards is the PC keying. They don't give you a separate PTT option for that, but it turns out that PTT happens on the RTS pin, the opposite pin you choose for PC keying of CW. Again, as I mentioned, the enhanced COM port is used for rig control, and the standard one here can be used for keying. TS890, same story, standard for keying, enhanced for rig control. You'll have to, again, right-click and determine which is which by using the device instance path. Their menu is a little more straightforward in theirs. Okay, well, how do I get my contest logger to actually key the radio with these techniques? Well, in N1MM, which I assume most of you guys have used, you do configure ports, you view the hardware tab, and you check this little box that says I'm going to do CW on the same serial port that I'm controlling my rig with. Click the set button, and then right here there's a drop-down list where you can choose that this should be CW and this should be PTT. Right now, the default in N1MM is to set these to always on. Guess what happens if these are set to always on and you open your program? Your rig goes key down solid. So I'm trying to get them to change the default here to always off. So that doesn't happen if you happen to enable the pins in the radio as I'm recommending here. Down here, you might, somewhere here, there's a setting for Win key setting. You don't want to use Win key in this case because you're doing a CW keying by pins instead of by Win key. And Win test software, which happens to be my personal favorite, is a very straightforward dialog, very similar. Set what pin you want to use for CW and what you use for PTT. So there's this long-standing myth that came out of the old days of N1MM before they migrated to .NET that the CW keying would be lousy if you try to use a USB cable or a serial port to key CW, and you have to buy a Win key if you want to send decent CW. Well, that's sold a lot of Win keys, but it's completely unnecessary in my opinion. You can go ahead and turn the performance options on, and then you won't have timing issues. I had a guy say, my CW was lousy when I did that. He slid this slider here all the way to the right, and then all of a sudden his timing issues went away. So on a laptop, you'll see this little battery icon down here, and you slide this slider to best performance, and you will find the CW timing is great. On a desktop PC, it's a little different. You have to go into the control panel, into the power options, and you have to, normally you don't see this high performance listed. You have to say, create a power plan, and click that, and then you can choose a high performance one, and that will allow your timing on CW and RIDI to be very, very good. Good enough for making QSOs for sure. You will not get complaints about your jittery CW or your FSK jitter. And again, to use MMTTY to get it to key by these pins, this is for FSK now instead of AFSK, which we were talking about at the beginning of the meeting. You do have to pick as the port, instead of a COM port number, you pick this EXTFSK icon. There's two of them. There's a 64-bit one and an old 32-bit one called EXTFSK. Everybody's saying you should use the 64-bit one. I have my doubts about that. I actually have seen a little better performance by using the old one. They both work the same as far as I'm concerned. So once you, before you do that though, you want to make sure that MMTTY isn't sending commands to the radio or grabbing the radio serial port. So you got to click this radio command button and make sure all this is set to none and this is all cleared out. There's no commands being sent to the radio by MMTTY. That's your logger's job. You don't want to do PTT that way. Then you go over to the miscellaneous tab. You say, I'm going to do my transmitting on the COM TXD pin. And you want to check once this USB port button. For all USB ports, you want to select this limiting speed option instead of normal. And that will get your good timing on MMTTY. After you click OK, you will see a new pop-up window come up from EXTFSK, and that is where you tell it the COM port pins you want to use. Again, DTR for FSK because it's closer in the alphabet, and RTS for PTT. And then you're done. Some radios like Kenwood, you may have to select invert FSK. Don't invert PTT. Well, what if I have more than one program like HRD and N1MM that both want to talk to the radio at the same time? Well, the way the electrical wiring of a RS-232 works, even a virtual one on a USB cable, is that there's one line called the TXD line, which is pin 3 from the PC to the radio. That's where the PC transmits its data to the radio. And you can't put two transmitters on the same antenna and key them both at the same time. And you can't put two TXD lines together and wire them in parallel to a radio and have it work at the same time, because one's swinging high in voltage, one's swinging low in the voltage, and you get nothing. So the deal is you can only have one device connected on pin 3, and that's usually the PC and the radio. However, as I mentioned, the PC will send a command to the radio on pin 3, and the radio will like, what frequency are you on? and the radio will send a response back on pin 2. And that response can be shared among many devices. It's okay to wire all the RxD pins you want to devices that know how to listen. Multiple PCs, a step-by-R controller, an ACOM or s.t.e. automatic amplifier, they'll all listen to the RxD pin, Elecraft AMP2. There is an auto info mode where you don't need a PC polling the radio to get any data out of it. It works pretty well in Elecraft, in ICOM, in Kenwood devices. You can turn it on only by command. There's no menu for it. And as soon as you power off the radio, it goes off. So it's not very useful in Kenwood radios. As I mentioned, multiple devices, including all these controllers and band decoders and amplifiers, they can monitor the RxD line in parallel. So everything switches at once. As soon as the radio says, I'm on this frequency, they know what to do. So at present, the RF kit amplifiers that I know about, they require to talk to the radio serial port themselves. They want to do all the polling themselves. And so I think they will not operate in listen-only mode, and that's a problem if you want them to automatically switch their tuners to the right frequency with no transmitting required. So for other hardware devices, if you'll forgive a shameless plug here, I created a box called the serial box, or S-box. There's two different versions, with one with a USB adapter built in and one with a straight serial connector. And it allows you to wire up to 4 devices in parallel. One connector is designed for an amplifier like an ACOM or s.t.e., and the others are serial connectors for devices that need 9-pin. And it's a really easy way, because I put 4 NPN keying circuits inside of it, that you can key CW and PTT and FSK for these older radios listed here that do not support it in their menu as an option. But you get the same function, one USB cable to the serial box, and then multiple cables from that can key your radio and control it. And if you're interested, there's the link, or you can find it on my QRZ.com page. Well, what about sharing serial ports with software? So there are many ways to do it. First, to do it right, it was VE3NEA's OmniRig software. It acts like a traffic cop, and there's a lot of software that does support it. They have a very long list. Here are some of the examples, and the nice thing about OmniRig is it owns the serial port, and programs say, I'm OmniRig, whatever you're talking to, I talk to, and they can do it simultaneously. Unfortunately, some software programs like these, N1MM and N3FJP, they decided that the OmniRig support was too lowest common denominator. They couldn't do all the commands they wanted to do, or they felt they couldn't. So they decided not to support it. So it makes it very hard to share a rig serial port between a program like HDSDR, which is a nice waterfall display program, where it can track the VFO. Won't work if you're using these programs. As I mentioned, OmniRig owns the serial port, and therefore it doesn't allow for any collisions. One program request is handled, then the next one. And so there's no conflicts or data mixed up between the applications that talk to OmniRig. However, the CW and PTT and FSK keying doesn't work through OmniRig. The RTS and DTR pins are owned by OmniRig. There's another nice option out there. OmniRig is free. I don't think N4PY Pegasus Plus is free, but it does allow sharing of a radio's COM port, kind of like the microham routers. It generates virtual serial ports that other programs can talk to. And with a box like my serial box, you can have it echo Kenwood format data to a ACOM amp or a band decoder and so on that needs a hardware connection. What about the program like VSPE or VSP Manager or COM0Com? Well, those are general purpose serial port programs. They don't know when a radio command starts and when a radio command ends. They just see a string of characters and they send it off. So there's a high probability that you're going to have collisions if there's 2 devices or programs trying to talk to the radio at the same time through these software serial port devices. So I can't recommend them for ham radio use, although VSP E can be convenient for getting a trace of commands going to a radio sometimes. Some radios have both a USB and a 9-pin serial connector on it, like the K3 and the FTDX3000. But with those 2 radios, they don't operate independently. You have to pick your rig control on one or the other. And so there is no real simultaneous access to both of those. But in the K4 and these other radios that I've listed here, the serial port and the USB port do operate independently at independent baud rates, if you like. So you can use the hardware port, the E9, for a device like a step-by-R controller, and your software can use the USB connector, and there's no conflicts. In ICOM radio, they, instead of a 9-pin for most of them, they use this CIV connector, which they call the remote connector. It's a mono 3.5 millimeter plug, and Elecraft 1500 and the ACOM and s.t.e.m amps can monitor that. And they mostly operate independently, but you have to set this menu item, USB CIV port, to unlink from remote. That sort of breaks the connection between the two ports, and then they can work independently, and two devices can poll at the same time. Finally, wrapping it up here, the sound card you get when you plug in a modern radio is very useful for FT8 and RIDI decoding audio modes. And the trouble is, you plug in more than one and you end up with all these devices called USB audio codec, and you don't know which is which. So what you can do is you can label them, and this is easier than going into the registry like I did before to label serial ports. If you want to label your sound cards, right-click on the speaker icon, open the sound settings, and then your window will look one of two ways, because it's either in two columns, as I'm showing here on the left, or in one column over here. You're looking for this related settings thing. Depending on how wide your screen is, it'll either be off on the right, or it'll even be, you'll have to scroll down to get to it. It's a tiny little scroll bar here, so you don't realize you have to scroll down. Use the mouse wheel to get there. You're looking for this link that says Sound Control Panel. That's your friend, Sound Control Panel. If you can't find it, just hit that Windows key, run, and type in this command here. This is the Sound Control Panel program. You can just run it directly. You don't have to go through all this mess. And this is your friend. This will tell you, this green check mark, what your default device is for Windows. That's something you need to concern yourself with. The first time you plug in a brand new USB cable to a radio, Windows will see it as a brand new sound card and think, oh, you must want to use that for all of your dings and bleeps and Windows sounds. So you definitely do not want that. You want the sound card in your PC to be the one that Windows uses for its sounds, its default device. So you'll find the check mark on the USB audio codec. You click on this one to highlight it, click Set Default, and the check mark moves up. You need to do it on both the playback and the recording tab. You can click the Properties button, and, well, let me see here. Let me back up. So I was asking, how do I tell what sound card is what? Well, you can look for these USB audio codec devices in the sound control panel. And as soon as you unplug the USB cable, powering off the radio isn't good enough. You've got to unplug the cable, unless you have a big red switch on the back like an ICOM. And you'll see one of them will disappear. And then plug it in and it reappears again. That's the device that is your radio sound card. By the way, you don't have to worry about Windows setting it back to the default, as long as you don't make it look like a brand new device by moving it to a different USB port. A different USB hub, I mean. So you can label these things both in the recording and playback tabs and click Apply. So you just go up to the General tab on the Properties button. You can type in any string you want here. I've said microphone IC7610. That's actually the output of the radio. It's not the input. That's what you record on a sound card mic, if you will, and so that's the output of the radio. It's a little confusing, but you get used to it after a while. I like to get fancy and change the icon to something that looks kind of like a radio so I can distinguish it. So I'm back up here a bit. Here's this change icon button. You can click that. You get this little list here, and maybe somebody will come up with logos that really look like your radio. We can add them to the list, but for now that looks kind of like a radio, and that way I can distinguish it from the mic on my PC just visually. So to summarize everything I've covered today, there's some things I'd like you to remember. Here's your takeaways, as they say in the business. Be sure to use the Windows Device Manager to manage and number your COM ports and get rid of the ones you don't use. Of course, uninstall any prolific devices and their driver. you definitely need to change the FTDI default options if you hope to do PTT and CW and ready keying over those USB cables someday. I like to register my COM ports using the registry editor. It is subject to change, but it is helpful as long as it lasts. And then I strongly encourage you to set aside your WinKey, plug paddles into the radio, and try these CW, FSK, and PTT keying methods via the virtual serial port pins. For Cedric's old TS930, I can build a cable that goes to my serial box and it'll key FSK on his 930 through a USB cable, no problem. DTR for CW and FSK, RTS for PTT because they're close in the alphabet, and make sure you don't have two serial ports with the same number. Otherwise, things will get confused. And finally, I showed how you can label your USB audio codec devices. So here's some references. My QRZ.com page has a link to this presentation slides and some other presentations and tips that you may find useful. The USB device viewer software, if you want to download it, that's the link. I do like Process Explorer a lot. It has a lot of power, but just to find serial ports in use, it's excellent for that. And of course, my serial box, which is also linked on my QRZ.com page. And you can always email me at this easy to remember email address. So now is time for some Q&A. I hope my audio is still working, and I'm going to terminate.
Hey, Bob, let me interrupt you for just a second and tell everybody that for the drawing, if you're a DRC member, you go up to the little page-looking thing, and Jeff has put a link on the drop-down, and there's a blue link there that'll get you into, so we know you were here, and then he'll do the drawing from that. So
I saw a pop-up question. I'm trying to figure out how do I get to that list of questions that came in. I saw what is wrong with prolific drivers? Oh, I only see it pop up and then it goes away. How do I get the whole list back so I can see all the questions?
It's either in the lower right corner of your bar or up at the top. It's a little kind of a comment box.
I see a chat with everyone. Okay, chat with everyone. No. At the top, there's activities, the clock, and chat with everyone. And
yeah, click the chat with everyone, and it'll open a box with all the chat messages.
Oh, there we go. That's it. I thought I clicked it. All right, I'm going to start at the top at 6:02. Well, that was when we started. Somebody was supposed to remind somebody to record. I think that was happening. So we're still recording here. Is Prolific a brand name? Bill Worthington asks. Yes. It is the name of the chip that goes in the cable. The cable might be labeled, some Chinese name or something, but when you plug it in, you'll see the Prolific device driver is chosen. So it's the name of the company that makes the chip that goes in the cable, and not the cable maker itself. Well, somebody answered that already. Door prize drawing. Does a device driver that installed with 91A? Well, if you're seeing COM port numbers in your device manager, I'm a little puzzled by the RT systems for an FT991. What is that? I believe the 991, you want to install the Yaesu driver for the 991 for its USB. Now, let me think a second. RT systems may provide FTDI USB to serial adapters. And so anything you're using for read control on the 991 should work with WSJT, but you won't be able to have two programs access it at the same time. Is there one device driver that works with most control software? There's usually one and only one device driver that works with the device. So the device driver is dependent on the manufacturer of the device. One FTDI, there's different versions, like a newer one or an older one, but they're all FTDI drivers. RT systems may have their own driver. I'm not as familiar with that USB to serial. Remind me if your 991 has a USB connector, if it's only serial. I think it has a USB. Maybe not. So what's wrong with Prolific devices? They were cloned, and their design was sort of copied by a whole bunch of unauthorized manufacturers. And they didn't quite get it exactly right. And so you plug it in, and then Prolific came out with a driver at one point that would actually turn it into a brick, and that made people all upset. I've seen Prolific drivers that work for a little while and then they quit I've seen prolific drivers that need to use the RTS or DTR pins just for power all the time, otherwise they don't work. They're the cheapest and the worst on the market, and they're just not recommended. And there's no reason to save $6 to get a prolific versus an FTDI that'll do the same thing. So, okay, the FT991 has a USB port, so that you should install the Yaesu software, and then you don't need the RT systems to program it. Can you share the 9100 COM port between HRD and SAT-PC32? Probably not. I believe the 9100, I'm thinking of the 9700 now. Does the 9100 have a USB connector? I think it does. And it also has a CIV connector. And you can change it to unlink from remote, as I mentioned. Now the CIV connector and the USB connector are two different ports that can control the rig in parallel. So you would assign HRD to one and SAT-PC32 to the other. But what you will need, and they are available, is a USB to CIV cable. They're on eBay. Make sure you get one that uses an FTDI chip or not a prolific. There's a company called Valley Enterprises that I think's a pretty good manufacturer that just uses FTDI, and they have a USB to CIV converter. So one program will use the CIV port, and the other program, like HRD, will use the USB port, and that can work. That's my answer for that. Jim, thank you. And Alexi was answering a question, yes, which I think was, does the 9100 have a USB port or the 991? So thank you for that. Okay, anybody want to ask a question by audio here, or are there more that I missed? Oh, thanks, Marshall.
Yeah, I got one, Robert. I didn't catch your call sign to request a copy of the overheads.
N6 Tango Victor.
So fast. N6
Tango Victor.
Tango Vicar, and at arrl.net or?
Yes, but you don't need to email me to get a copy of the slides. They're in PDF format on my qrz.com page. You don't need to sign into qrz.com to see it. Just go to my qrz.com page for N6TV and scroll down to the presentation section, and it's the first one at the top. And there's an older video where they recorded me giving it, but the presentation I've given you today has new slides.
Okay.
New information compared to that one. Sure. Anybody else having a rig or device control problem they'd like to solve besides Cedric needing FSK keying on his TS930? You're lucky you still have a 930 that works. I had a couple of them and they stopped working. I had to get rid of them. Everybody muted but me? Okay.
Okay, I guess no other questions. Well, Jeff, are we ready for the drawing? Or are we? And Bob, geez, thanks a bunch. Real informative.
Thank you.
We have
pleasure.
19 entries.
I'm sorry.
We have 19 entries.
19. So last chance. Anybody wants to get in there and register for the drawing? Go to that drop down with the chat, and Jeff has a blue link on there. Give you just a second for that. And
where's the chat? I don't see it here.
the little page-looking thing. On mine, it's at the top.
I see this thing that's
Looks like a cartoon bubble. Chat with everyone. If you hover over it with the mouse, it says chat with everyone. It looks like a cartoon bubble. Yeah, somebody just posted the link to my QRZ page. Thanks, Jeffrey. Wish I knew you guys' call signs. This is one thing I don't like so much about Google Meet. It doesn't let you change your name easily.
Cedric, did you find it?
No, I did not.
You should have a bar at the top or the bottom.
Wait a minute.
It's got some little people, and then next to it's a little.
I'm on Robert's QRZ page. Hang on a minute.
Well, that's probably why.
Okay, so how do I get back?
Cedric, there's a comment box either at the far right of your bottom bar or at the top of your screen on the right.
Yeah, mine is the
You'll
top.
see the participants with the number 38 and then the
Yeah.
chat box next to it. Click that.
click on to where it says 38. Is that what you
No,
want?
it's one
No,
to the right
one
of it.
over.
It's like a green.
Right, click that.
Okay, and is something supposed to happen?
At the bottom, there's a says complete the form with this link to enter the door prize drawing.
I had to click it twice.
Okay, you can hear me, but I see the form.
Oh, good.
Where's the form? All I get is to send a message to everyone.
Click the
Yeah,
chat with
so
everyone.
Above that, you see the complete the form, and there's a link there. Click on that link.
Am I ineligible?
Depends how fast you are.
I'll let it go. What's the door prize?
It's a HRO $25 certificate.
Ah, not bad.
Beats a poke in the eye.
Okay, Jeff, I think I just sent it.
Okay. So anybody else having a problem? Otherwise, we're going to do the drawing.
Hold up, I'm still filling out the form.
Okay.
It's on the way.
Excuse me.
Okay, we're up to 28 now, so we'll cut it off there.
By the way, I think I figured out what I did wrong with the audio. I had it's a laptop I had suspended, and then I plugged in the cable and I unsuspended it, so it wasn't awake while I plugged in the connector, so it wasn't smart enough to switch, something like that.
Okay, we did a randomized sort, and popping out the top of the list is Bill Worthington, KE0YKV.
Look at those arms.
Let's clap for him.
What you gonna buy, Bill?
I'll have to think about something for field day, but $25 is better than a poke in the eye, but it doesn't go far at HRO.
I recommend
true.
I recommend a personal fan, so
Personal
so
fan.
so you can cool down, have it just blow air in your face all field day to cool down with. It's gonna be
Okay,
a hot
well,
one.
Jeff, I did the unthinkable and clicked the wrong button, so I got back.
Well, I think this ought to be a lesson that in order to win the door prize, you have to ask lots of questions at the Elmer session.
So, Bill, years ago we had a member, Dean Hayworth, and I don't know if you ever knew Dean.
nope.
And he, in retirement, worked at HRO for a while. And I went in there one day looking at stuff, and he says, "Jeff, how you doing today?" I said, "I'm just looking around to see if there's anything I need." He says, "You don't need any of this stuff."
But I want it. Yes.
I took a friend there about a month ago, and he was just about like a kid in a candy store.
I know the feeling.
Okay. Well, Jeff, we ready?
I announced that Bill was
Oh,
the
I'm sorry.
winner. So yeah,
Who was the winner? I missed it.
Bill Worthington.
Okay. Congratulations, Bill.
Thank you.
So
And I'll
yeah, the
send that over to
computer
Jerry.
the computer picks it, so random pick, so fair as it can be. Okay, well, any other questions for Bob?
I missed the Elmer session. Was there an unanswered question in the Elmer session? Maybe I can take a stab at it. I missed the early part.
Daron, you got anything there?
I don't think so. I think it was mostly field day stuff. So
Okay.
The first portion was a field day.
Okay.
No mic on my end.
Okay. All right, Daron.
Somebody says.
That was Jerome. So I guess he's having mic issues. So,
If he
okay.
has a question, should we give him a chance to type a question or?
He actually runs the
Yeah,
Elmer section.
he runs it. So
Oh.
I don't think he's got a question, but
I see.
unless he's got a leftover.
I
See, he
understand
said
now.
no, that,
No more questions. I got
no
it.
more questions. He got it.
So what's your opinion on the question about AFSK versus FSK?
I like FSK. It's less susceptible to RF getting the audio connections. I don't remember if the 930 has a digital mode that turns off all the speech processing and stuff. You don't want to use a speech processor through the mic jack if you're running a digital mode like FT8. You just want a flat response.
It does have a speech processor, but I do mostly CW, so I don't use that. And it's got a mode for FSK.
Right, but if you wanted to operate FT8, I don't think it has a separate mode for that, a digital audio mode like packet or something. And therefore, you would be in a sideband mode on that radio, and your processor would be on, most likely. So I'd go for FSK. Ed Munns, W0YK, is the FSK expert. He can give you a whole talk on RIDI if you want. I'm volunteering
What's his call sign again?
Whiskey Zero Yankee Kilo. He's a big time RIDI contester.
Okay.
Whiskey Zero Yankee Kilo, Ed Munns. And he'll show you some slides that indicate that some radios actually key kind of dirty on FSK or wider than ones that key by AFSK. But again, I still prefer FSK because you don't have to deal with sound cards and mic jacks, and it's all done over the keying cable. And it's just wired in. You need a sound card, of course, for decoding, but you don't have to worry about RFI getting into your audio lines if you use FSK. So I'm partial to FSK.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Bob, what your connection with I've got a K3 and the KPA 500 and the scope and all that. I love the radio. But I just want, there's so much back and forth going on the blogs and stuff about, Elecraft, and what's affected them so much, the COVID and like lack of people or parts, or, you see all kinds of, like they're not going to be able to repair stuff. And then I saw one, the guy said, well, we can repair most all the boards and stuff. So, I mean, you can't believe like anything what you see all the time.
Yeah, I mean, they're Watsonville headquarters. I was there yesterday to pick up a radio. They are kind of closed down at the headquarters, but they're working remotely. There's a few guys who work at headquarters in shipping and delivery and stuff. The company is very much in business. They say they have a fine financial position. They did lose a couple of people, not to dying, but well, a couple of them died too. But in COVID, and they did. They're short one technician, I think, and short one customer support person. So they got really backed up on email requests for support. You can imagine they probably get 200 emails at their support email every day, be my guess, somewhere in the world, with 30 or 40,000 rigs out there, maybe more. There's going to be somebody who wants to email a dumb question to support. So they got to deal with all those one at a time. And if there's only 2 or 3 people answering the email, it's going to back up. But they're very much in business. They are shipping K4s. They're probably shipped. Well, I think they're up to serial number 170 or so. They started, I think, with number 70, so probably 100 of them have shipped, I'm guessing. I don't know. I don't work for the company. I am a volunteer field tester. But they're very much focused on getting the K4 out the door. They had a lot of orders at Dayton, and so that's kind of taken priority now. Everyone is, including DigiKey, is having trouble getting parts. This is just, the nature of what's happened in the last year. Prices go up, etc. But there's no fires here right now. One of their technicians did lose his house to a fire, my good friend K6XX, but he's back up there on a trailer on his property in the hills, and he'll probably be on this weekend in the All Asian CW contest. So they're bouncing back, and they are still very much there. If you say, they can't fix anything, I take that with a grain of salt unless you hear it straight from the company. I believe they're supporting anything they can still get parts for, they're going to support.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't say that. Somebody said, that you got to take with a grain of salt all this stuff that
Yeah.
you hear and understand that. But
It's so much easier to deal with Elecraft than to deal with Yaesu or Kenwood or ICOM, in my opinion.
my experience with them was I've got the K3 Mini and the remote stuff, and I had issues setting it up, and the guy I talked to, he was very helpful, and this was pre-COVID, but he was very, very helpful, and and I always thought, their customer services, they brag about it, at least they were. So
yeah,
I just hope they're doing well.
They are. They're fine. I mean, they don't have government contracts like Flex or some of these other guys. So, and they're of course USA built. The parts probably come from overseas. Same with my cereal box. I get parts locally, and I have the boards made in Washington State by Express PCB, and then I put them all together in my garage. But so I consider it American made, which is a good thing. I could probably buy it cheaper in China, but I don't want to. So I want to keep the quality up. So
exactly.
That's we need to support them. They're going to support you. They're the only radio manufacturer I know, maybe Flex, that responds to public reflectors where questions or suggestions or whatever come in. I mean, I've given suggestions to ICOM, and it took over a year and a half for it finally showed up in the radio. I do that with Elecraft, and it might show up in the next build if it's a good idea. So
yeah, I had a Flex 5000 previous, and I was not particularly. It was a cool radio, but I had issues with it, and well, anyway.
Well, all radios are complex these days.
Oh boy, yeah.
And I'm lucky that I'm kind of a computer guy, so I can figure out most of the stuff, but I can't learn everything. It's the stuff I'm not familiar with that people keep throwing at me. I have to go read the manuals, and then I can figure it out. So I help a lot of people with various COM port problems, radio configuration problems. I learned how all the radios work based on what everybody wanted to connect together, amplifiers too, at least from the control standpoint, not the RF stuff.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for that. I feel that's. Well, I just hope they do well. I'm happy with the
Don't
K3.
give up on them. They're definitely still around.
I'm not giving up, but it's just you hate to see some of these people say. It's like anything. They're just kind of talking. They send an email and they don't get an answer the next day. Well, then they got the company going out of business, which I know is not the case.
They're just trying to get attention.
Sure.
Obviously.
Oh yeah. All right. Well, thanks for that. I haven't decided if I'm going to go K4 or not, but
well, I've used a K3 and a K4, and the K4 is a better radio in many ways. You might see the K3 higher up on Rob Sherwood's chart in terms of pure receiver close-in dynamic range, but that's only one thing. I can tell you that a K4 sounds a lot better than any K3. Just the audio alone is worth the investment, in my opinion. Plus all the connectivity you get. The K3 is 12 or so, maybe 13 years old now, and CW guy like me had always had a problem with the jittery CW after you get up to a certain speed, like 37 words a minute. And it shortens every keying element. There's stuff that just didn't have room to fix in the firmware. The firmware was full. They couldn't do any more with the radio. So all of those flaws that you see in the K3 are being addressed one by one in the K4 in terms of RF delay for not hot switching an amplifier is fixed. The keying being chopped was fixed, and then they broke it again. So I'm trying to get them to fix it. Now it keys everything too long. And what else? Well, you get, if you're a RIDI guy like Ed Munn's W0YK, you want to decode and set different levels on both the main and sub receiver in your Windows controls. They enhance the sound card, so now it's a stereo line in instead of kind of a mono one. With as far as Windows is concerned, to improve the sound card. And boy, you crank down the CW filters real narrow in a K3, and it starts to ring, and it gets a little hard to copy. You do the same in the K4, being a SDR with DSP filters. You just don't hear the ring down to 50 hertz. It's just amazing.
Well, I'm kind of a CW guy too, but I'm a ways from 37 words a minute, so I don't have an issue with this with the sound, but I do mostly CW.
Just operate a couple of contests. Well, even CW, I like to listen to real low pitches on a weak signal when there's a lot of static. I don't like the high pitch static crashes. I like the lower sort of bassy ones. I can pick out a signal better. The bass response of the audio circuit in the K4 is way, way better than the K3's bass response. So, and on phone, you hear the deep bass that you just don't hear on the K3. So K3 is a great radio. It's still better than the K4 in some respects, like absolute filtering. That'll get improved when the HD model comes out of the K4. That'll be an add-on that adds a superhet receiver and roofing filters to the front of the front end of the K4. That'll be, who knows, maybe a year from now we'll have that option.
And it's all modular too. K4.
Yeah, there's space inside, plug-in stuff. Yep, I've opened it up.
Okay, well, that's all I've got. Anybody else before we call it a night?
Robert, is the Elecraft an American company?
Oh yeah, they're Watsonville, California, just an hour away from here.
Oh, I always thought they were German.
Goodness. No. Elecraft has been a USA company for what, 20 years now, 15 years?
Okay.
Yeah. N6KR is the chief engineer. WA6HHQ is the co-founder. Yeah. Definitely a American company. Okay, guys. Well, thanks for inviting me to your meeting. And if you have any questions and you can't figure it out from my slides, just feel free to email me and be happy to set you up.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Again. Great. Appreciate it. And I guess unless there's something for me, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining in.
See you.
Good field day.
Good luck at field day.
Thank you.
Vaya con Dios, muchachos.
And Jeffrey, you can stop recording now.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the reminder.